Welcome to The Tax Factor, the UK's top tax podcast from Blick Rothenberg, the tax, accounting and business advisory firm. This week with Neil Insull and Annie Hughes.
Hello and welcome back to The Tax Factor. Hi, I'm Neil Insull and I hope you all had a great summer. It doesn't really feel that long since we were here talking before the summer on The Tax Factor. And we'll probably be talking about the same things like fiscal holes and budget choices, but at least this time we finally have a date for the budget and more on that later. I'm also delighted to say that I'm joined this week by a new voice on the podcast, Annie Hughes, who's part of our US-UK team. Annie, welcome to The Tax Factor.
Thanks, Neil. What an honour it is to be here and what a week to start.
Absolutely. So, Annie, why don't you kick us off with some of the big tax stories that are making the headlines this week?
This week and today, Neil, I will. So
today, and we're recording. And I should mention, Annie, I'm going to talk all over you on this podcast, but you know that's my habit. Today we're recording on Wednesday afternoon, so things may have progressed in the news on the tax front between Wednesday and the day you would listen to this podcast. But anyway, that caveat aside.
It's a good disclosure.
The Tax Factor. Headlines.
Finally had a date confirmed by Rachel Reeves for the autumn budget. It's going to take place on the 26th of November, which, interestingly, is nearly a month later than last year, apparently to give the Office for Budget Responsibility more time to crunch the numbers, although, you know, they should have seen this coming. She's ruled out tax rises for working people, but left the door wide open for reforms affecting wealthier individuals, including possible changes to capital gains, inheritance and property taxes, but we'll come back to that a bit later.
Indeed, we will.
Big news of the hour is Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner confirming that she underpaid stamp duty on her Hoe flat, citing poor legal advice. She's already contacted HMRC to settle the liability and even told the BBC she briefly considered resigning over the issue. Finally, following on from last week, property market still feeling the jitters, growing rumours of sweeping tax reforms, lots of speculation around extending capital gains tax to main homes, adding national insurance to rental income, or even replacing stamp duty with an annual property levy is causing many homeowners, particularly in London and the South, to hit pause on moving or selling.
Crikey. There's a lot to get through. No surprise, we'll be picking up some of those stories in today's episode. But let's start with that all-important date that we've now got in our diary. Certainly at Blick Rothenberg, we've got it in our diary. It's now in my diary, the 26th of November. It's a Wednesday, the day before Thanksgiving, isn't it? I think.
Will be.
I don't know whether that's intentional, but it's one of the latest budgets in recent history. I think Ken Clarke, this is before your time, Annie. Ken Clarke, he was a well-known Conservative Chancellor. He quite liked late November budgets back in the early 90s, but not since those days have we seen such a late budget. So why are we having such a late budget, Annie? What's the speculation there?
Some might speculate, Neil, it's because nobody knows what to do. There's a lot of rumours flying around, aren't there? And there's a lot of proposals being put forward as to what could or should or might happen. So, yeah, I suspect there's a lot of people over at the Treasury with their calculators out trying to see what's best.
Are they waiting for something? Is there going to be something now which, I don't know, is there something going to happen in November or October which is going to be fantastic news for households or working people, as the government like to call us? Or maybe it's not me, maybe I'm not a working person, but is there something? Now. What is coming along? What is it? Is it lower interest rates or the impact of lower interest rates on people's pockets? Is this why she's stopping things?
More time to see some positive movement, or maybe waiting till it's really cold to give some further announcements on those winter fuel allowances. Potentially, I saw the SNP were pretty disappointed that they learnt about the budget date on social media, apparently, according to their news release this afternoon. So it could be something related to not giving the people of Scotland time to react ahead of their elections next year.
Maybe it is. I'm also I was also reading about the fact that the Office of National Statistics were going through a bit of a crisis period in producing quality data, that they were producing things late. They couldn't rely on their own information. And maybe this is the point, is that they just don't have great information. Okay, they probably don't have a lot of good news at the moment, but they don't actually have any information even to give the good news or the bad news. So maybe there's a point there that she's taken on board. She also probably wants to protect her career for another month longer or so. But I think it is important to accept that, there's going to be some significant changes in the budget.
There's going to have to be.
In November. Do you want to, Annie, just mention a few things from your own perspective? I know you work in the US-UK team.
Yeah.
Is there any lessons to be learned that Rachel can look at and decide on?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I've been giving this some thought. As you say, I'm US-UK tax nerd at the heart of what I do. So we've had the equivalent of a budget over in the US. The bill's now been passed, and there's only a couple of places where it's affected individuals. One of the things that's happened in America is they've always had a very substantial exemption for gifts or bequests made. That's been increased by Mr. Trump to $15 million. So that's the amount an American can give in their lifetime or leave on death tax-free.
How many?
15 million as of next year.
Okay.
I work with a lot of Americans who are here in the UK, and when I talk to them about their £325,000 exemption, you can imagine how the conversation goes. But there are rumours about Rachel Reeves making significant changes to inheritance taxes. There are considerations of a lifetime limit. That idea is thrown around occasionally. As you know, Neil, in the UK, you can give £325,000 tax-free every 7 years, and there's some things you can do around the edges, around gifts out of ordinary income and things like that. But in America, that's a substantial sum of wealth. Do you think we could see something like that here in the UK?
God, we've been speculating on everything. Even if she does make changes, these are tiny amounts in the scheme of things, are they not? I mean, I can't believe there's a huge amount of inheritance tax that she could raise from these changes. I mean, she's playing it around at the edges, but maybe they all add up, and maybe that's what needs to be done. And maybe the policy is essentially to go after the wealthy first. And if this is the way that they perceive that they can do that, maybe there will be some changes in that area.
No, we don't have trusts. Maybe some stability in inheritance tax and planning, I think, would be welcome. But I agree.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, inheritance tax was left alone for many, many years, and it's only really there now that people, clearly there's some bigger sums available around because of house price increases, etc. But the opportunity to get more inheritance tax is definitely on the table, and I think there will be some changes in the budget. But as I say, the amounts are pretty insignificant in the scheme of things.
Absolutely. Speaking of house prices, what do you think about this idea of a property levy?
I actually, you know what? I don't actually own a property at the moment.
So you're
so I'm
all for it.
I'm all for it. Do it. Tax them. I think it's a political point actually, as much as anything. I think there's a lot of politics behind that principle. It's not just about raising money, but because there's plenty of easier things to raise money. Increase income tax, increase VAT, etc. I mean, a wealth tax, which essentially is something that needs to be considered definitely as an option. And I think there's some time to go before something like that comes along. But I don't think again, thinking about what's on and off the table, that's on the table, I think, from my own perspective, but it's not yet. Okay, because they've really got to think clearly about the impact on the housing market and also political support. I think it is something which is totally against a lot of people's acceptance of how people should be taxed. I mean, I think before they do that, they should get rid of inheritance tax. I think it's difficult to have both, if you see what I mean. But
that's it. Yeah, that's fair. Inheritance tax, historically not the biggest revenue raiser. So yeah, there's some radical ideas. You mentioned VAT. It'd be remiss of us not to talk about Wetherspoon's latest gimmick.
Oh yeah. Wetherspoons is an interesting business, and they've got all sorts of exciting ideas about how to deal with the inequity on the high street between supermarkets and pubs in the amount of VAT that's levied on food and drink.
Exactly.
So what's Wetherspoons planning to do, Annie?
Yeah, so they're trying to highlight the benefits of a VAT reduction across the hospitality industry, and in order to do that, they're offering a 7.5% discount on all food and drink, although not alcohol in Scotland, for 1 day only. And I believe that is on the 18th of September. This is not an advertisement for heading down to Wetherspoons, but what do you think, Neil?
Well, I think it is.
You're better versed in VAT than me. Do you think?
I thought you were going to say better versed at in where your local Wetherspoons is.
No comment.
I mean, I know where my local Wetherspoons is, but I wouldn't necessarily frequent.
Do you think that's gonna move the
it's
government?
A publicity stunt, and it's great idea in the sense of putting the Wetherspoons name on the tabloids. But I spoke about this in the last season of the podcast, where I feel, as many people do, there's been a lot of tax policy around which has really disadvantaged the hospitality sector. There's been increases in employers' NIC, which has really hit the low paid sectors in particular, including hospitality. I think there is a certain inequity in terms of how VAT is levied on food and drink, in terms of the hospitality element of that and the supermarket retail element of that. And that probably needs to be looked at. I think the high street is definitely suffering from all sorts of reasons. It's not just VAT, there's NIC, there's a whole host of other factors which are really crippling the high street, and that is causing significant job losses both now and in the future. And I don't think we've seen the end of that. And I quite like the idea that Wetherspoons want people to return to the high street and actually get drunk in those. Did I know?
Eat food.
Yes, eat food and have a slight tipple.
Yes.
And I saw that Scotland, they're not allowed to actually reduce the price of drinks, are they? Alcoholic drinks. Strict rules on
alcohol.
But anyway, it's a nice little publicity thing and stunt, and it's an interesting point. Yeah. I'll just mention a couple of things on VAT before we talk about Angela. Can we talk about Angela at the end of this?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Because the news will move on, and what we'll say in a minute probably is going to be history. But anyway, on VAT, I just thought I'd mention a couple of things. One is, I think it's extraordinarily unlikely that we'll be seeing a rise in VAT, but she probably should be thinking of increasing the rate of VAT. They increased it from 20% as a standard rate now to 25%. They raise 40 billion every year, essentially, from that rise, or up to about 40 billion. I think there'll be a behavioural change and there'll be other factors which might diminish the tax take. But, they're talking about huge black holes here, which need to be filled, and just scraping around the edges is just not going to do that particularly effectively. So VAT rise may well be the right move. I think there's some unfairness to that, as we've talked about already, but it is certainly very simple, and maybe one of the things that she could do to make it a less onerous tax on some businesses in particular and consumers is probably take more businesses out of VAT by increasing the exemption, the registration exemption. So from the current 90 to maybe even doubling it. Yeah. I mean, that'd be extraordinary, but actually may make a lot of sense. It reduces the compliance for a lot of businesses. It reduces the amount of work for HMRC. And at the same time, you've got this increase in rate, which actually may fill the hole, certainly in the short term, and maybe something they could return to a lower rate in the future.
Yeah.
I'm not personally suggesting that that's the right approach, but I think it seems to tick a lot of the boxes, actually, from my point of view.
Flying your flag for a VAT increase, Neil, when you heard it here.
I'm not flying my flag. I'm not. I'm not.
Let's not talk about that. But I think that, it answers your question, doesn't it? Why is the budget so late? Well, there's a lot to think about. There's not many avenues to explore. You've mentioned the black hole that exists. There's also the feeling of the average people in the UK, right? Like, things aren't great. Money
people
is
are feeling a bit
required.
Low.
People
is that
are,
what you're saying?
I think it's really easy for us as tax advisors to sort of talk about the budget and talk about the finances of the country. And you have to also bear in mind tax is a privilege, and it's actually required to keep some of the services that we know and love. I think thinking outside of the box around things on VAT, it could well be the right way forwards. Like you say, the numbers have to be crunched, and the impact on wider society needs to be thought out. So maybe that's the reason for a delayed project, although you'd hope they've started work on that a long time ago.
Why you're talking about, on the subject of tax advisors?
Yes.
It's a neat segue into
very nice
Angela Rayner's, our Deputy Prime Minister's troubles at the moment. I mean, we shouldn't get too political about this, and we don't need to be. But as anyone who hasn't had their head stuck in the ground for the last week or so will be aware of the fact that there's been a lot of news stories about Angela's stamp duty payments on a second home in Hove. And what was revealed today by Angela is that she's made an error. Okay, so she paid 30,000, I think, of stamp duty on the purchase of a luxury apartment in Hove, as I think some newspapers are calling it. I don't know if it's luxury or not. It was 30,000. And she was advised by a tax advisor, unnamed, that said that if you, before buying this Hove property, you put your existing property that you own in Ashton-under-Lyne into trust before you make the second. You then are not owning two homes. And as a result, you don't need to pay the increased rate of stamp duty that would normally be payable on a second home. So she paid, under advice, we understand, the normal rate of stamp. But if she paid the higher rate, it would be another £40,000. Now, again, the story will become clearer as the week progresses after this podcast goes out, I think. But my understanding is that she took advice on the basis that because her name wasn't on the register, because this was in the trust name and she'd sold her property to the trust. I think she'd actually sold it and maybe got a loan. There was a loan involved as well. But she left it essentially to her minor children as beneficiaries. And what appears to have come out is that rather than this being some sort of discretionary trust, this was a life interest trust, which gave the minor children a life interest in the property. As a result of those particular factors, you look through the minors to Angela, and Angela still essentially was on the register, essentially for the purpose of stamp duty. And therefore, she'd never actually got rid of her first home. She'd had the first home and the second home, and therefore she was rightly in the higher charge. And she's accepted that she's took poor advice or didn't get the right advice. She took second advice from a barrister, don't know who that was, and she's fessed up and she's going to pay the right amount, and she's going to get investigated, I guess, by the Parliamentary Ethics Committee and so on. I don't know, Annie, you've got any more knowledge to impart on that?
No inside track, but I mean, reading Angela Rayner's statement, it read quite interesting. And as far as tax cases go, taking the politics out of it, I think there was a few things that jumped out to me as good things to touch on. I think often the use of trusts gets a really bad rap. As you know, Neil, and as I know, they can be useful for a lot of things. And actually, in this situation, providing a home to a minor who has what sounds like speciality needs in the situation of a divorce, to me, knowing nothing else about the situation, looks like a very legitimate use of the trust. Maybe that's me reading the statement with really kind eyes, but I think it's a really nice example of where trusts can...
You have kind eyes, Annie, so
can
let's give her the benefit of the doubt.
Well, okay. Whether Angela Rayner did it for this reason or not, but a use of trust in a situation like this is not abnormal, and actually use of trust to protect interests for minors and for lifetime interests is something we see as legitimate, where trusts often get a bad name. So I think to touch on that, I think the other thing to touch on is, I'm not an expert in stamp duty, but if you ask the question, what's the stamp duty on this? The first question an advisor would say is, do you own another home? No. Okay, well, it's this rate of stamp duty. Getting into the weeds of, actually, do you perhaps own another home even though you don't quite own another home, is a very niche piece of legislation. So I guess I'm not shocked the first set of advisors got it wrong. I think it brings us on to something I don't know how often we get the chance to touch on this, on the tax factor, but HMRC and penalties when things do go wrong. How do we think they would look at this? I mean, if Angela Rayner was a normal taxpayer, they made a mistake in their tax filings, they've come forward in less than a year, they're making the payment up front, they took advice, they took, perhaps reasonable care. If you've gone to an advisor and you've done what they've told you to do, you would assume HMRC, if this was not under the public eye, would be typically quite generous in terms of penalties on a case like this.
I think so. I absolutely agree with you. I don't think she should be treated any differently to any other member of the public paying taxes. And just because she, as one of my colleagues said to me just before I've recorded this, is to say, she should have a moral responsibility, more so a stronger moral responsibility, to have looked at this and decided what the optics were and make sure that she was doing everything in the way that a politician should be doing it, as if a politician should be under a different set of tax rules to anyone else. And I think my view on this, and again, it's a personal view, is that she should be treated exactly the same as anybody else in any other taxpayer. clearly, I think if she, in terms of the optics, because of her position in the government, it is clearly good to go to a good advisor, okay, and get some really great advice, which she got the second time around. And I'm not quite sure why she didn't get it the first time around. And I think she'll be kicking herself, actually, because I'd be surprised. Okay, she might have done this in a view to thinking, well, someone probably said to her, well, you've got a disabled child. It's a good idea to put everything into trust and deal with it that way for your minors. And that wouldn't be uncommon, as you've said earlier. And let's do that. And as a result of that, let's think about the repercussions in terms of capital gains, inheritance tax, stamp duty. And I think, if everything had been done correctly, she would have paid the right amount of tax at the beginning. I'll give her the benefit of the doubt. With my kind eyes and your kind eyes, let's give her the benefit of that. And let's hope that was the idea, that if she'd been told the way the trust is written, she wouldn't be able to basically argue that she didn't have two homes. And I think she would have accepted that because of her position in government and as a good, honest taxpayer. So I'll give her that. But I think it is unfortunate.
I agree with you, Neil. Politics aside, but not at all, it's not a good look. Tax advice very much in the forefront of this. Seems like somebody has made an error. Seems from her statement that she took the right advice. She trusted the advisors that she had, right? And whether that's a misinterpretation of the law or an aggressive application of the law, either way, it's not quite right. I think stamp duty, such an interesting thing. We Blick Rothenberg have published articles explaining how sometimes buying two homes before you get married can create a great stamp duty saver, tax avoidance, not evasion. And, mixed use of property rules and people with large farms and working land and all of that. It's a really interesting part of the legislation. It'd be interesting to see if Rachel Reeves comes out the back of this and says, do you know what? Stamp duty isn't great the way it's drafted, and maybe we should look at an annual property levy instead, or maybe we should look at simplifying some of these complex rules that can be a little bit grey in places.
Blick Rothenberg, celebrating 80 years.
Well, I think that's all we have time for this week. So a big, huge thank you to you, Annie, my new co-host. Been great having you on board. Hope it wasn't too scary for your first time.
I survived. Thanks, Neil.
I'm glad to hear it. And for our listeners, don't forget, you can stay up to date by visiting the Blick Rothenberg website and following us on social media. And as we head towards Budget Day, which is on, to remind you, the 26th of November, we'll be sharing plenty of news and insights. And if you sign up for our updates, we promise we won't flood your inbox.
Yep. And if you enjoyed today's episode of The Tax Factor, please do like, share and or subscribe. It really does help us reach more people in the run up to the budget. Things are going to get interesting, I think.
Indeed they do, or will. Indeed they will. I'm back. Yes, I'm back in a few weeks' time in October. Next week, though, it's Ellie Theochari and Rahana Earl. They'll be here, the phenomenal duo. But for now, from Annie and me, it's goodbye.
Goodbye.
That's the Tax Factor. Since launching in August 2023, we've become the UK's top tax podcast in the UK podcast chart. Join us every Friday for expert insight on the latest tax news. Subscribe on your preferred podcast platform or listen direct on the Blick Rothenberg website, where you can also find the latest updates and analysis. The Tax Factor from Blick Rothenberg. Copyright 2025.